Welcome back. Thank you for joining us. Over the past several weeks, indeed several months, the dominant political story in the United States has been the scale of alleged fraud uncovered across multiple states. Minnesota has been central to that scrutiny, but it is far from alone. Similar concerns have emerged in Ohio, California, New York, and Maine, raising serious questions about oversight, accountability, and the use of public funds. Now that debate has taken a new turn. In Washington state, a newly elected mayor has signaled a clear refusal to pursue further fraud investigations. Her position is unambiguous. She has stated that she will not authorize inquiries into where public money has gone, arguing instead that such investigations are not about accountability or crime, but about division. That assertion deserves careful examination. Fraud investigations exist to establish facts, protect taxpayers, and uphold public trust. To suggest that scrutiny itself is the problem reframes a question of governance as a question of political motive, and that is a significant shift. What these points indicate is a broader pattern that has developed in parts of the northwestern United States. Cities such as Portland have for years been criticized for a permissive approach to crime and enforcement. Washington state has often followed a similar trajectory, and this new administration appears intent on continuing that course. In effect, the message being sent is that demands for transparency are unwelcome and that accountability is optional. That is not a minor policy disagreement. It is a fundamental statement about how power is exercised and how the public is expected to respond. We're going to examine that stance closely and what it means in practical terms for governance, public confidence, and the rule of law. Let's get into it.
Seattle Mayor Katie Wilson, in her first public comments since influencers posted video outside Seattle area daycare centers alleging fraud, says she is working to protect the providers. What have you done in those regards?
Yeah, so we're working on that. So we have conversations going on with the departments. And yeah, it's just, I don't think it needs to be explained why it's problematic to have random people showing up to daycares. And I think the fear in the Somali community is real. The fear in immigrant communities are real. So we're taking that very seriously.
Wilson, who has been on the job for a week, says she's not convinced there is more to the story. On Tuesday, former longtime state auditor and Democrat Brian Sontag said he's seen enough to believe an audit of state funding of daycare centers is necessary, given allegations in Minnesota, Ohio, and Washington.
Well, there are questions, and I'm not saying they aren't answerable, but you don't know until you get the answers.
Along those lines, have you asked anyone to follow up on the fraud claims, either to the Department of Immigrant and Refugee Affairs or SPD?
No.
So there's, as far as you're concerned right now, there's no reason to suggest there's any sort of fraud?
This whole issue is not really about fraud, right? It's about dividing and conquering. It's about making an immigrant community a target, right? There's no reason to assume based on the identity of a daycare operator that their small business is doing anything wrong.
Sontag said these are investigations that can take months or years. Wilson, again, saying she has not directed anyone on this particular matter in her first week.
There's been a great deal of commentary surrounding Ms. Katie, much of it focusing on her personal finances. Some reports note that at 43, she continues to receive financial support from her parents. Whether that is appropriate or not is largely beside the point. It is a private matter and not, in itself, evidence of wrongdoing or political failure. What does matter, however, is her record and the direction of her administration. Criticism intensifies not because of her personal circumstances, but because of the policies she appears to be advancing. According to critics, and increasingly to observers on the ground, this is an administration that is not only soft on fraud, but one that is also presiding over a more permissive approach to open-air drug use in Seattle. That is where the real concern lies. When enforcement is relaxed and accountability is dismissed, the consequences are felt not in abstract debate, but on the streets, in neighborhoods, and in public spaces. This is not about personality or background, it is about governance, priorities, and outcomes. Let's take a closer look at what is happening and what it signals about the direction the city is being taken.
New tonight, city leaders insist allegations that the Seattle Police Department will no longer arrest people suspected of open drug use in Seattle are not true. They call the allegations misinformation. This controversy surfaced after a leaked email from the police chief to the department's officers. KOMO's Michelle Esteban went to City Hall for answers and to confront the city attorney sworn into office today about prosecuting those cases. Michelle.
Molly, I learned that actually all of this began with this memo from the city attorney's office. In short, it says the city is going to lean into a Seattle ordinance, all in an effort to treat drug use with diversion programs while reserving criminal charges for cases where diversion may not work. From Seattle's top cop to Mayor Katie Wilson and now the newly sworn in Seattle City Attorney Erica Evans, all three insist allegations that Seattle cops were ordered to halt open drug arrests are not true.
Nothing's changing in terms of policy. Officers still have the discretion to make arrests for folks using. All we're saying in our office is we're going to follow the law.
And lean into a city ordinance already on the books that emphasizes treatment over prosecution.
We got to look at this problem as if this was a loved one that's suffering and what is the right response.
I asked the police chief directly about it. He insists nothing has changed when it comes to police continuing to make drug-related arrests. But that's not how the police union interpreted it. An internal email from the chief to officers released by the department to KOMO reads, effective immediately, all charges related to drug possession and or drug use will be diverted from prosecution to LEAD. LEAD is the Law Enforcement Assisted Diversion Program. It emphasizes treatment over prosecution, and it aligns with the city attorney's campaign promise to prioritize diversion over prosecution. And while there may not be a change in policy, it represents a change.
The former city attorney had 97% of those people didn't get any treatment, and they were right back out in our streets. And so the difference we're saying is we're going to change that.
And if they don't, Evans says her office will pursue traditional approaches, a.k.a. prosecution.
If we go to 12th
in
and
the
Jackson.
face of these multiple allegations of fraud, the obvious question is this: what are Washington state officials actually doing in response? The answer, at least so far, is far from reassuring. Authorities say they are reviewing the findings, but those reviews appear tentative and inconclusive. There has been movement, but little clarity, an investigation that seems to circle its own conclusions without reaching firm outcomes. Whether that reflects a lack of evidence, a lack of urgency, or a lack of political will is open to interpretation. Ultimately, viewers will have to judge for themselves whether this constitutes meaningful scrutiny or simply the appearance of action without substance.
New at 6 in a Waste Watch report, we're learning of alleged serious oversight and accountability gaps of the Washington Department of Children, Youth, and Families over the last 4 years when it comes to payments to child care providers. Good evening, I'm Preston Phillips.
And I'm Mary Num. The state auditor tells KOMO News they've lacked access to provider-level data in the last 4 statewide audits, data that's needed to fully track where the money is going. This comes as concerns about child care funding make headlines in our state and the rest of the country. KOMO's Michelle Esteban has been following the story. And Michelle, a yearly audit is happening right now. Any findings yet?
Well, hi there, Mary. I can tell you questions, as you mentioned, about the daycare provider funding have been swirling for weeks, and that is why the auditor wanted to address it. The audit that's ongoing, she told me there is no evidence of fraud within DCYF regarding what's known as the Child Care Development Fund, but said the agency remains high risk and has oversight gaps last year alone to the tune of $400+ million. What sort of grade do they get over the years, and how do they stand out amongst other agencies?
They are probably the most risky of all of the departments in state government.
State Auditor Pat McCarthy says DCYF is one of the highest risk agencies in state government due to the size, scope, and vulnerable population it serves. She points to ongoing accountability concerns documented in past audits, including this one for fiscal year 2024.
$416 million in unauditable dollars spent by the Department of Children, Youth, and Families.
And here's what the audit reported. By not complying with federal law requirements to maintain adequate supporting documentation for expenditures, the department made it impossible for our office to audit the federal dollars it used for payments to child care providers. Because the department did not comply with HHS requirements to allow for the tracing on grant expenditures to a payment level, we are questioning all $415,579,473 in federal program cost it incurred during the audit period.
We will look at individual providers when we do those audits, but we have to get that information from the agency to be able to do that body of work, and we haven't been able to get that information for the last 4 years.
What this points to, increasingly, is the emergence of a system in which enforcement appears selective, where outcomes depend less on actions taken and more on who you are and which protections you can rely upon. In certain jurisdictions, the impression being given is that if you hold the right political or institutional advantages, scrutiny simply does not apply. Some local leaders seem willing to signal that they are not interested in establishing whether wrongdoing has occurred, provided the individual in question sits on the right side of the political divide. That is not sustainable. Systems built on discretionary accountability rarely endure because public trust erodes quickly once people conclude that rules are unevenly applied. It is also important to place this moment in a broader political context. Much of what we are seeing appears reactive, driven by opposition to the current national leadership rather than by a coherent long-term strategy for governance. Political. Cycles do end, and when they do, there is often a sharp correction. History suggests that periods of ideological overreach are followed by a return to more conventional expectations around law, order, and responsibility. If that pattern holds, the adjustment will not be smooth. It is likely to be abrupt, contested, and politically turbulent. The question is not whether that reckoning comes, but how prepared institutions will be when public expectations realign with political reality.